is the early history of the Palestine-Israel conflict. Now, the reason why this is important to understand is because this is a history lecture, so it's going to be boring. So caffeine up on the soda in the back. It is history, so there's no opinions, there's no interpretations, there's no politics in it. This is fact from unbiased sources, very scholarly sources. And that's what this presentation is. Every slide that you see here, every image that you see here is pure fact. Unless I say out loud, this is my opinion or my interpretation, you can take everything I say as fact. I've done my research, and there are works cited pages so that you can fact check me if needed. Or if you want to do some research on your own, I highly recommend at the end of the lecture, I can actually real quick go through, and I highly recommend some books that I actually have read and are really great. So,
before you begin, just the ground rules, we just want to set them for the lecture. Just please be respectful, no speaking when he's speaking, and just hold all your questions for the end. Thank you.
Alright, some background history. I don't know technology. Some background history. So, first, just to set the tone, we're taught in the American school system a lot of American history and world history. We're not really taught a lot of Asian history. So to put it in the context of the things that we learned in school, if you look at the very top, in 1901, the British colonies in Australia formed, they combined to form the Commonwealth of Australia. So 1901 was the formation of Australia. If you look at 1903, the Wright brothers flew the first airplane, the first manned flight. 1914, World War I begins. 1918, World War I ends. 1920, Great Britain establishes mandatory Palestine, so the mandated Palestine. 1922, both Ireland and Egypt claim their independence from England. 1939, Canada, Cuba, the United States, so North America, basically say they send back the German Jews who were fleeing Germany from the persecution of the Nazis. 1939, World War II begins. 1943, Lebanon gains its independence from the French. In 1944, Syria gains its independence from the French. 1945, the United Nations is established. So these are just some basic world events just to frame it all, because we're going to be starting in 1900. Now we're going to start talking about specifically Palestinian history. This is a list of Palestinian cinema, so Palestinian films by a Palestinian filmmaker filmed in Palestine. From 1927, and I stopped at 1949 because that's as far as I'm going to go today, just to show you, these are the films filmed in Palestine. A lot of times it's argued that it was a land without a people. Just here you see, published in France, a poster advertising travel to Palestine, and if you go, and over here is a picture from a book. The Kaiser of Germany, actually, this is his first trip to Palestine. So it was a really big thing. Whenever somebody went to go visit, they made a big thing about it. They didn't take pictures, but they drew pictures. There was a lot of posters advertising it. Here's another one published by Thomas Cook & Son in Britain. And this is, again, all about travel to Palestine. A lot of times, with the invention of the steamboat, it became a lot easier to travel to Palestine. So a lot of people were doing it more. And at this time, in around this image was published 1901. 1901, Palestine was under Ottoman rule. But this gives you an idea. The fact that there are French and German and English advertisements to go and travel, there's peace and there's coexistence in the area. It doesn't matter that they're ruled by the Ottomans or not, that they're Arabs or not, Muslims, Christians, Jews, whatever. People were going in and out as they pleased. All right. Then we get to some real pictures. This is the mother lode. This is an actual image of a horseman looking over to a Palestinian village. He's looking at Darbiya and the slopes of Mount Tabor in Galilee. So this is an actual image taken in the early 19th century. So you could think, the early 20th century. So like from 1900 to 1910-ish. Here's another picture of a family in Palestine. And this family is a family in Ramallah in the early 20th century. So again, from 1900 to about 1910, 1915. This one is about villagers in Bethlehem. this image here. So just to show you, these are not really Bedouins. These are people established, have homes. They're living there. This is, now we're going to talk about infrastructure. This is the old Jerusalem. It's a picture of what Jerusalem used to look like in the early 20th century. And this is Jaffa from the ocean, from the sea, because it's a coastal city. Here's Nablus. So I'm naming just some Palestinian cities that some of you maybe know of, some of you may not. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque. A lot of people see the Dome of the Rock and they think that that's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque that we're hearing all about in the news right now. The third holiest site for Muslims. Here is Christians in the Jordan River and their pilgrimages. These are Russian Christians on their pilgrimage to the Jordan River. And the next image is Christian Orthodox procession on Easter Day. It's from the Greek. It's a procession from the Greek Patriarchate to the Holy Sepulchre in Old Jerusalem. That picture is dated at 1910. And here's some pilgrims entering Bethlehem on Christmas Day. Back before Christmas was about presents. There was the pilgrimages to Bethlehem and Jerusalem. This is the Crusader Church of St. Anne in Old Jerusalem. This was built in 1140, the Common Era. The reason why there's a French flag at the top is because the Ottomans actually gave the church to the French in 1856. So again, there's a lot of unity, there's a lot of peace and coexistence going on. Here's an image of a Jewish woman praying at the Wailing Wall. Throughout the centuries, when Arab and Muslim rule in Palestine, Jews had full access to their holy areas in Palestine. There was no problems between religions going on. Access only became an issue when Israel claimed its independence as a state and after the war in 1948. And finally, here are some images of a vegetable market, quilting. I'm not sure what they're called. They're people who make carpets. And then a spice market. So again, they have economy, they have trade. I'm getting into a little bit of political stuff. This is a propaganda poster. This poster literally translates. It's a Zionist propaganda poster, and it translates to, at the very top it says, the Jewish Palestine. And then throughout this, as you can see by some of the images, is basically all the resources in Palestine that could be available. And this is a poster, keep in mind, it was published in the Palestine Mandate, but was to be sent back to England to convince the Jewish peoples of Europe to migrate, to move over to Palestine. So it's trying to show them, these are all the great riches that Palestine has to offer. And the question at the bottom here says, can Eretz Israel help the Jews? Eretz Israel means like the Israel land, the original Israel. Okay. Another one. This was actually by Karen Haysa. It's an official fundraising organization in Israel located in 48 different countries. Their purpose, is to collect funds and donations in order to build what they believe is a state on the way. Now this one, a lot of us have seen this circulating, Visit Palestine. This image actually comes from 1936. A lot of us think that, this is great proof that against the argument that there was no Palestine, or it was an empty land for a land without a people for a people without a land. This was actually a Zionist poster. This is actually a Zionist propaganda poster. And that is because in this time period, before the creation of Israel, Europe and the Western world knew the land as Palestine. And there was already distrust going on between the Zionist organizations and the governments. So when they advertised it as Visit Palestine, it is a Zionist way to show this is a beautiful area, come visit, to get more people from Europe and the Western areas to move into the land. Now, both of these were from, one's from 1947 and one's from 1948. The one on the left here is by, the left, is by Irgun, which is a Zionist terrorist organization. It displays what is considered Eretz Israel. So if you remember what I said, they believe that originally that this is all theirs. And if some of you know your geography, this is Jordan. And this is what is on the map. This is Israel. So they believe all that is theirs. And the text actually says, on this one here, on this image, the text says, the old city wall in Jerusalem is not Jerusalem's border. The Jordan River is not the boundary to our country. The sea is not the border to our people. This here is by Irgun, the Zionist terrorist movement, organization. And this is by Harut, the original right-wing political party when Israel was founded. Now, another thing to note, this organization became this organization. So it's the same organization, just different names. Now, the conflict. Now I gave you a little bit of background history. I showed you a lot of funny pictures. Now's the boring part. It's a lot of words. All right, the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, 1915. In the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, you have exchange of letters between the Sharif of Mecca, Hussein bin Ali, Saudi Arabia, and Sir Henry McMahon, the British High Commissioner in Egypt. Basically, the gist of the correspondence is that if the Arabs in the Middle East helped the British against the Ottomans, who at this time were aligning themselves with Germany in World War I, and at the build-up to World War I, if they aligned themselves with the British against the Ottomans and helped take down the Ottomans from the inside, so to speak, the British promised Sharif Hussein that the Arabs would be given all of their land back and they could govern it. It's theirs. So basically, you help us, we help you. Now, so this led to the Arab revolt against the Ottomans. So the promise of obtaining his own kingdom, I'm going to jump a couple bullets. It's important to know that the Arab revolt against the Ottomans was not a consensus amongst the Arabs living under the Ottoman Empire. This was one man and his elite agreeing with the British. So you have the Sharif Hussein, and these are speculation, that he was doing it to gain his own kingdom. Speculation based on fact in that him and his sons all got their own kingdoms, the kingdom of Syria, the kingdom of Jordan, and the kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So in June of 1916, Sharif Hussein led his group of armed Bedouins against the Ottomans. Now, it's important to note as well that the British provided the Arabs support in the form of soldiers. They gave them weapons, they gave them advisors, they gave them money. They even gave them a flag. So we all know the Syrian flag, the Egyptian flag, the Iraqi flag, the Palestinian flag, the Jordanian flag are all derivatives of this flag of the Arab revolt. So I don't know if you want to take pride in those flags or not, but they're all derived from these four colors and this sort of pattern. Okay. Here's an image of Arabs with their flag, ready to revolt against the Ottomans. So when Great Britain defeats the Ottomans in 1915, the Ottomans unsuccessfully tried to raid the Suez Canal, which was technically British at this time. So in 1918, Ottoman Syria was given to the British, was ceded to the British because the Ottomans lost against the British. And the French mandate for Syria and Lebanon, and then the British had a mandate for Palestine, and they were both ratified in 1923. The mandates were ratified as part of the League of Nations. The League of Nations is the one who coordinated the ratification of these mandates, and that's important to note for later. Okay. The Sykes-Picot Agreement. Now this is a secret agreement. Now we agree that the McMahon-Hussein correspondence says if the Arabs help the British against the Ottomans, the Arabs will get their land. The Sykes-Picot Agreement was a negotiation between the French diplomat Francois-Georges Picot and the British Sir Mark Sykes. They agreed that once the Ottomans were defeated, they would take colonies in the Middle East and assert their own spheres of influence. Now Tsarist Russia was in on this, but kind of took a step back, and in 1917, October of 1917, the Bolsheviks exposed the agreement. And the headline on the news article that I found says, "The British were embarrassed, the Arabs dismayed, and the Turks delighted." Because the Arabs kind of stabbed the Turks in the back, and they didn't get what they wanted. So, and the British were dismayed because, the British were embarrassed because it came out that they double-crossed the Arabs, and the Arabs were upset that they were cheated. Balfour Declaration. Just to show you, this is an image of the actual Balfour Declaration. This is the Balfour Declaration. And the gist of it basically says that the British government agrees to appease the Zionists in Britain and establish a national home, a Jewish national home in Palestine. So going back to the Balfour Declaration is a letter from the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, to Baron Walter Rothschild, who is the leader of the British Jewish community. And he wanted this letter to be transmitted to the Zionist Federation in Great Britain and Ireland. The declaration was clear to state the phrase national home instead of state because of opposition to the Zionist program within the British cabinet. So these are the little nuances. If they had said Jewish state, that's implying we want this, we want our own government. But by saying national home, the definition of a nation, we're the nation of FAU. We are all FAU students. We share the common trait that we all go to FAU. We're owls. You guys have probably heard the Gator Nation because they all have one mentality and whatnot. So national home is a group of people who share a common history, a common background, and they live in an area. Doesn't mean they own the government, doesn't mean they have any ownership, just that they're together. So the Zionist Commission in Palestine, they formed to support the Balfour Declaration and promote Zionist objectives in Palestine. Now these are what we would see today as sort of lobbyists in England. So they met opposition from the indigenous Arabs. The Zionist Commission for Palestine relocated from England to Palestine. They relocated from England to Palestine and they found opposition from the indigenous Arabs. And it led to the establishment of the Palestine-Arab Conference. Now the Palestine-Arab Conference consisted of Arabs from all over the Middle East, what we consider today Lebanese, Syrians, Iraqis, and even Saudi Arabians. And all faiths, not just Muslims, Christians, native Arab Jews at some points. But even the Arabs were divided amongst themselves over the idea of British rule, whether they wanted British influence or not. So they formed in the Middle East to oppose the Balfour Declaration, political Zionism and British policies in the Middle East. But once again, there was some divisions between the Arabs, as there is when you have issues of political standing. Mandate of Palestine. This is what got the ball rolling. The Palestine Order and Council, which is the constitution of the Mandate of Palestine, established a legislative council, which was to consist of 23 members, 12 elected, 10 appointed by the High Commissioner. 12 of the elected members, of them, 8 were to be Muslim Arabs, 2 Christian Arabs, and 2 Jews. Now this caused problems there, as happens. The Arabs protested because they argued that they were 88% of the population, and they were only given 43% of the seats, and that was unfair. Keep in mind, at this point, if you wanted to do division of numbers where it's plausible, where you actually see, I'm forgetting my English. If you wanted to divide it into percentages of religion, it was mostly Muslim and Christian in the area. There were Jewish people living in Palestine. But it was sort of negligible in that the amount of the Jewish population there didn't amass to a high enough percentage that they would receive 43% of the seats. So that's where the problem happened. But with the immigration, with the influx of Jews from Europe, that number rose. So, as a result, and again, as happens with us sometimes, the Arab General Strike begins in 1936. Now, the Arab General Strike happened as a result of the feeling that Arabs were being left out of negotiations, they were being hoodwinked, and they were being occupied by the British. I mean, with the falling of the McKinsey Correspondence, with the failing of it, and then with the Balfour Declaration coming about, the Arabs felt like they were being cheated, that deals were happening under the table that they were aware of. So a strike happens, and I would say strike is a euphemism for the term. It's more like a revolt. There was a lot of riots and revolts. So the Appeal Commission from England was established after increased violence in mandatory Palestine. And in 1937, the Appeal Commission found that The Palestine mandate was unworkable. The idea that it would be divided and there would be 8 Muslim Arabs and 2 Christian Arabs and 2 Jews doesn't make any sense. So they actually, this was the first time it was recommended to partition the land of a Jewish sector and a Muslim sector, or an Arab sector. And in 1939, the Arab Revolt ends after the British forces, supported by 6,000 armed Jews, suppressed the widespread riots. More than 5,000 Arabs died, 300 Jews died, and 262 British soldiers died. And at least 15,000 Arabs were wounded as a result of the stopping of the revolt. The MacDonald White Paper. The White Paper, issued in 1939, was a policy paper issued by the British government. So, this was as a result to the rise of Nazism in Germany, which is, in its foundation, anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, and the Arab general strike. So, the British saw that there was something wrong. There was something that they were missing. The Arabs were striking as a result of the Jewish people moving in. Nazism was happening. There was something that they were missing. And they wanted to appease the Arabs, who they started realizing that they were sort of cheating from the get-go. So this white paper actually abandons the plan for partition. It abandons the idea that the land of Palestine needs to be divided between Muslims or Arabs and Jews. It called for the creation of an independent Palestine governed by Palestinian Arabs and Jews directly in proportion to the. In section 2 of the white paper, put limits on the immigration from Europe to Palestine from 1944, and after 1944, it restricted Jewish immigration to Arab authority. So the deal was a limit of 75,000 Jewish immigrants over 5 years were allowed to move into Palestine. After those 5 years, the Palestinians and the Arabs of the area would decide, should we let more in or should we wait? And if they say yes, then they will let more in. If they said no, that's it stops. That was the idea of the white paper. Section 3 of the white paper actually stated, it put restrictions on the rights of Jews to buy land from the Arabs as well. Now, this angered a lot of the Jewish population in Palestine. This got them really upset because all these restrictions were happening and they felt that they were getting what they wanted with the Balfour Declaration. It also upset some of the Arabs because the Arabs felt like it wasn't strict enough. The Arabs felt like 75,000 Jewish immigrants was too much. They wanted complete and final prohibition of immigrants and the denunciation of a Jewish national home. That's what the Arabs requested because they figured pressure was on them already. So the Arabs finally agreed to it. As a result to the Arabs agreeing to the white paper and the white paper passing, Zionist terror groups coordinated a bombing campaign that killed 38 Arabs in Palestine and wounded 44. And that moves us into the effects. These are dates now. In 1940, the Jewish Lehi, which are the Fighters for Freedom of Israel, and the Irgun, which, if you remember the poster I showed at the beginning, with what is Eretz Israel supposed to be, the National Military Organization, these are what they stand for, movements initiated violent uprisings against the British mandate. The Jewish immigrants in Palestine have decided we've had enough of the British. We wanted this as our land, and then we're going to take it. In 1944, the Jewish Brigade is formed to smuggle Jews out of Europe into Palestine during World War II. And then in 1946, the United States, under President Truman, recommends that at the Anglo-American Committee of Inquiry that 100,000 Jewish immigrants be immediately accepted into Palestine. Now, the British weren't okay with this. In 1947, the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine compiled a report about the situation in Palestine. Now, the initial plan for Palestine by the UNSCOP was that it would be a bi-national state, an unpartitioned state of Palestine. But then the Jewish Agency, which was the Zionist Commission for Palestine that we mentioned earlier, that relocated, pressed for Jewish representation and the exclusion of both British and Arab countries from the committee. And they sought to take the committee to visit concentration camps and areas where, like Holocaust survivors, and areas in Germany where the Holocaust took place. the UN SCOP actually extended an invitation to the Arabs, and the Arabs declined because the Arabs, first and foremost, felt that the transition of authority of the Palestine Mandate to the United Nations was illegal in itself, because the League of Nations established the Palestine Mandate. The League of Nations failed, dissolved. In that effect, anything that the League of Nations put forth is null and void. So the belief was that by the UN taking control of or taking charge of what is the Palestine Mandate was illegal in and of itself. And the Arabs actually requested that the issue be brought forth in international court. And they refused to collaborate. The committee, after looking into all the facts, recommended that the region be partitioned into an Arab and Jewish state, but that they would both retain an economic union. So that politically they'd be divided, but in all other cases, they'd technically be one state. And then for Jerusalem, an international regime was envisioned, even though it was already sort of that way. Here's some images just to show you. This is, I'll start here, the distribution of the population. The color may not be as clear, but the lighter gray is Jewish population, and the black is the Arab population. So if you see here, again, because they're immigrating from Europe, on the coast, you have a much higher Jewish population than you do inland. And in Jerusalem, you have a little bit of a higher Jewish population. But if you look all around, it's all Arab, all over the place. Looking here, it's land ownership. So the green is Arab land ownership, and the red is Jewish land ownership. White is public territory, parks, government buildings, whatnot. Unclaimed land. So again, the Arabs own pretty much all of the land. If you look, there are very few areas, and if so, they're on the coast because immigrants who come in by boat kind of stay where they are, unless they're moving to Jerusalem, because who doesn't want to move to Jerusalem? Okay. So the UNSCOP was part of the United Nations, and they put forth the Partition Plan for Palestine. So that's in 1947. In 1947 also, the Arab League rejected the Partition Plan because they felt that, in essence, they were being cheated from the get-go. With the establishment of the Syrian and Lebanese mandates, as well as with the establishment of the Mandate of Palestine, they were being cheated. So the growing unpopularity of that mandate in Great Britain, because of all the uprisings and killings and whatnot, the British terminated the mandate and withdrew its forces. So at this point, the British left the destiny of the region of Palestine to the United Nations. Now this is what the Partition Plan was proposed. This is what the proposal for the Partition Plan was. White, you see, is what was going to be proposed as the Jewish state, and the mustard yellow, I guess, is the Palestinian state, and the lined area is international territory. Again, you see Jerusalem was supposed to be international territory because all faiths have really religious ties to the area. And this was proposed November 29th, 1947. The Arabs completely threw it out, didn't want it. The Jews were happy to take it. Here are some more findings that they had. Based on this partition plan, the division would be, on the Arab state, you would have 725,000 Arabs, 10,000 of the Jewish population. So you see the numbers are 99% Arabs and 1% of the population would be Jewish. In the Jewish state, the division is about 400,000 Arabs and almost 500,000 Jews. So it's almost a 50-50 split. And in Jerusalem, it's almost literally a 50-50 split. What is to be understood when looking at this is that the division were made to give land to the Jewish population. The Jewish population was what was taken into consideration when dividing this up. Because obviously if we wanted to give the land to the Arab population and cut it up, with the Jewish population wouldn't get as much land. So they wanted to maximize where were the areas that the Jewish population was most and give them those areas of land, as opposed to the other way around. Okay, so in 1948, the Jewish leadership declared the state of Israel within the borders of the Partition Plan set by the United Nations. So in 1948, the Jews said, regardless of what the Arabs want. We agree, let's declare our land. President Truman announced their legitimacy and basically announced that he supports them within 11 minutes of them claiming independence. So in 1948, the Palestinian Arab communities were destroyed and cleared by Jewish forces, many of whom were the terrorist groups that I mentioned earlier, within the boundaries of the partition state of Israel. So anything in the partition area, no matter if there was an Arab living there or not, that's Israeli territory, you need to get out, was the motto. So that's what causes the first Arab-Israeli war. Before the dust settled. I'm not going to get into the Arab-Israeli war because that would take another couple hours, and I see some people are yawning. It's history. So before the dust settled, the expulsion and ghettoization. Before the Arab-Israeli war, Palestinians in West Jerusalem, one of the wealthiest Arab communities in the region, had about 28,000 people. The people consisted of Greeks, Germans, Spanish, French, all international. By the time the fighting subsided, by the time the war was over, only about 750 non-Jews remained in West Jerusalem. And this was one of the wealthiest Arab neighborhoods at the time. Many of these 750 non-Jews were Greeks who were allowed to stay in their Greek colonies. The labor and concentration camps established and filled with Palestinians, these are the four biggest ones. You have one called Ijlil, which was capable of holding 3,000 prisoners, Atlet, capable of holding 2,100 prisoners, Serafan, capable of holding 1,800 prisoners, and Tel Letninsky, capable of holding 1,000 prisoners. We don't really hear about this, and actually it's really interesting because this information is only recently resurfacing with interviews and government documents that are now becoming public. There were labor and concentration camps in Palestine. And this is evidenced by the International Committee of the Red Cross. So Israeli forces began taking prisoners, both regular Arab soldiers, and able-bodied Palestinian non-combatant civilians. So if you were of age, physically fit, they would take you as well, because they would consider you as a threat, and they'd stick you in one of the concentration camps. All four camps were either on or adjacent to military installations set up by the British during the Mandate. So they were on or near already established military camps. Ijil, which is the biggest camp, was predominantly made of tents, housing hundreds and hundreds of prisoners. They were categorized as prisoners of war by the Israelis, surrounded by barbed wire fences, watchtowers, a gate, and guards. Alright, so this is an image of civilians captured during the fall of Lidda and Ramleh around the time of July 1948. They were taken to labor camps. If you look at the image, it's in July's heat, they were really thirsty, and they're given a drop of water each, carried by a child under a soldier's guard. So you see the soldier watching the children, and they're sticking their hands out begging for water, so the kids pouring water in their hands for them. The Jewish authorities treated all Arabs between the ages of 16 and 55 as combatants and locked them up as prisoners of war. Here's another image of the concentration camp in Ramleh in July 1948. The first labor camp was established in a city called Khalid. Unlike the other four camps, it was the first exclusive labor camp. Interviews with many former Palestinian detainees, and these are again recently resurfacing, saw the concept of Israel as a vicious enemy. So they thought their experience laboring in these concentration camps was nothing in comparison to the larger tragedy of the catastrophe in Nakba. So in their mind, even though they were in these labor camps and concentration camps, the even bigger catastrophe was the fact that they were being occupied and their homes were being taken from them. Looting. So there were high rates of looting of furniture, goods, books, paintings, carpets. Dave Ben-Gurion quoted in his library, I visited with the Sassan State of Israel's Arabic library in Jaffa. They had assembled tens of thousands of Arabic books. Books have not been sorted or cataloged yet. The collecting continues. So, In August 1948, the military governor of Jaffa, Mir Lando, issued the following order, and I'm reading his quote. No Arabic book is to be taken beyond the limits of the city of Jaffa. The committee appointed by the Minister of Minorities and headed by Dr. Israel Ben Zaeb's an experiment in Arabic literature and history will collect the Arabic books in Jaffa and accumulate them inside the city. Any person within the city who is in possession of any book of any kind is to inform the governor's office. So the idea was they understood that there's a lot of literature now in these Palestinians' homes because everybody has books on their shelf. And they didn't want to lose this literature because historically Arabs loved math, and we can all thank us for algebra, math and science and anatomy and medicine. And even now we watch TV and Netflix, it's great, but in days of yore, when people respected other people, they would give them books. Books were a form of entertainment, books were a form of learning. So there were a lot of books. And they recognized this, and they didn't want these books to go to waste. So they said, but again, because of a lot of looting that was going on, these books were being taken and run out. So they said, these books do not leave these cities. I understand these homes are abandoned. These books do not leave the cities that they're in. So in June of 1948, it was the need to decide who would retain temporary authority over these books was discussed in the memorandum regarding the urgent need for central authority, which would have custodianship over the abandoned public and private libraries and books. In short, I don't want to read the whole quote. The director of the National Library of Israel, Kurt Borman, basically said that the National Library would take these books that were being looted from the Palestinians' homes, and they would keep them in safekeeping. And if any Palestinian came forward and said, these are my books, and could provide evidence, they could take them back. So the idea was that initially, Israel had decided, we're not going to keep these books, we're going to keep them for safekeeping. And if they come, they want them, you can take them back, it's yours, or we will compensate you for them. That was the initial discussion. But, what's interesting to note is that even though they said that that was the case, in the same report, it actually said that, again, I'm not going to read the quote because it's a long quote. After saying that, they basically said that we also, even though these homes have been abandoned, we need to take everything that's in them as much as possible to keep them for safekeeping. So it justified the act of opening homes up that were empty or empty of people and taking whatever they thought was necessary to take. All right. Assimilation. In 1948, the National Library was given the status of an official central authority, whose function was to manage the matters of the abandoned libraries. So, most of the approximately 30,000 books collected in West Jerusalem during the first 9 months were in Arabic, English, French, German, Italian. Now, initially, they were willing to give these books back. But what's interesting is that in the 1960s, at some point, again, 1960s is a point where there's really no conflict, there's not that much political tension. It's a relatively, quote, peaceful time in Israel. In the 1960s, by 1960, it was decided that they would remove everybody's name and all the authors' names from all the books and replace them with AP. AP for abandoned property. And to this day, the books are cataloged in the National Library of Israel as AP for abandoned property. So that was, as the scholar whose journal I read on this topic quoted, a form of European integration and colonialism. They took a land, they took its literature and its belongings, and they assimilated it into its own. Because as of now, there's no way to prove who owns what and who wrote what. Assimilation. And that's right. So questions and discussion.
Stand up, guys. I'm going to be the one who's moderating this, so I'm going to do it one at a time. Whoever I see basically put their hand up first for any questions or comments, they're free to do so. And please direct it towards the speaker. So if you have any questions or comments, please raise your hand.
Thank you very much. Can you just, when you talked about the Britain, conspiring with the in Saudi Arabia to, rebel against the Ottoman Empire?
Yes.
Why did, what was Britain trying to do?
Now, this is at a point in history where, as we all know, the British, and if I wanted to, the British were losing some of their colonial territories. So if you remember what I mentioned in the beginning, Australia was claiming its independence. But the British at this point are notorious for colonizing lands and claiming them as their own. Examples are in the Caribbean, and you have India, you have in Asia, they just go all over the place. Africa. So the idea was, initially, the Ottomans were helping the Germans, and the Germans were the enemies to the English and the French and the Russians during World War I. So they wanted to defeat the Ottomans, because if you defeat one of the enemies, you take one peg off the table starts to tilt. So the idea was, with the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, they promised the Arabs, help us, we help you. But then when they saw that it was really easy to get the Arabs to comply, then you get the SykesPicot Agreement, where they say, you know what, why don't we just give them Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia is important to Arabs, and we'll retain our spheres of influence. So it was British imperialism, pretty much. The French and the British and the Portuguese like to cut stuff up and claim it as their own. So with the SykesPicot Agreement, the winners of World War I, which were the French, the Russian, and the British, were going to divide up their booty, which was their claim to the Arabic lands. The Russians were like, no, we're all right. So the French and the British said more for us. The British they took Palestine and what is Transjordan, so what's now Jordan, and they had Egypt, so there was that. And the French said, we'll take Syria and Lebanon. So I don't know if anybody's here Lebanese or Syrian. The French is taught there, it's spoken there, and that comes from European influence. But again, when the mandate runs out, French was like, this is too much for us to handle, and gave them their independence. But the land of Palestine, and then Egypt gained its independence. The land of Palestine is a very important piece of land for a lot of different people, so they really didn't want to give that up.
Any other questions?
Or comments? Yeah.
Was there ever established government in Palestine?
There were local governments. The Ottoman Empire, before the demise of the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomans owned all of that land. I wish I had the image. It was a great image because I never knew this before. The Ottomans controlled the land of Turkey, moving all down through the Tigris and Euphrates region, so what's Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and then it juts down to where Palestine is. And then what is Saudi Arabia is considered periphery of the Ottoman Empire. So they're not really under the Ottoman Empire's rule, but they are. It's like Puerto Rico. Saudi Arabia was Puerto Rico. I mean, that's the best example I can give you. They weren't a state of the Ottoman Empire, but they were part of the Ottoman Empire. Yes.
You said that the Palestinians were indifferent to Ottoman rule.
Yes.
So, but did they have an established government in Palestine, or how were they ruled?
There were governorships. There was a lot of villages. Again, if anybody has Palestinian parents, you hear, I'm from this village, I'm from that village. Palestine wasn't considered Palestine to the Palestinians. Palestine is a British name given to the region. Palestinians at that time considered themselves from these villages. Like, for example, and this is a personal thing, my village is Lifta, but I'm close to Jerusalem. So my father used to say that he was more from Jerusalem than anything, because he took pride in that. So again, because they were part of the Ottoman Empire, what is now Palestine, if you wanted to consider it as state-wise, was called Ottoman Syria. And Syria cut through Lebanon, Palestine, and Jordan, and that was called Ottoman Syria. But Palestine didn't exist until the British decided we're going to call this Palestine.
But specifically in terms of governance of themselves, were the Palestinians in power? Did they have Ottoman representatives in the area?
I don't know. I think it was, again, this is not based on the research I did this is prior knowledge. Local authorities govern. But local authorities that answer to the Ottoman Empire.
Questions? Comments? Concerns?
I would like to go to the first question. You said, please correct me if I'm wrong. You said the British gave the Arabs Saudi Arabia. So, British government gave it to who?
No, when the Ottoman Empire was defeated, because of the deal that was made, the British supplied troops to help defeat the Ottomans. So the British soldiers were already there. So if the British wanted to keep it, they'd just kill everybody and keep it. But what they said was, they gave it to the Sharif Hussein. They said, who was, I guess, the first king of Saudi Arabia.
Sharif Hussein?
Yeah. Not the first king?
No.
Okay.
It's King of Jordan.
No, Abdullah. King Abdullah was the first.
Sharif in Jordan, what's it called?
His title is the Sharif of Mecca. Yeah.
Okay,
but he was given Saudi Arabia by the British. So the British moved their soldiers out of Saudi Arabia, but they didn't move them out of what is now Lebanon and Syria and Palestine. So when I say they gave it to them, it's not that they owned it and they said, here you can have it. It's that they said, we won't stay here, and they left. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Any other questions? I actually have one, because I noticed you said something about the camps. I noticed you said there were 4 main camps. Does that imply that there were more?
There were 4, these were the 4 largest camps. There were a lot more. I didn't want to have a whole slide dedicated to listing all the camps, because this is a more recent development. And when I say recent, I mean within the last 10 years, these things are resurfacing, scholarly-wise, because when you talk about this kind of information, it's one thing to hear it by word of mouth. Oh, I was in a concentration camp. It's another thing to see images and to see factual evidence and documentation. So documentation has resurfaced as a Red Cross effort to find this information out. There are a lot of undocumented camps, like the one camp, the labor camp, Khalid, was given a number, but it was not considered an official camp. But there were a lot of official, those 4 that I mentioned were the official 4 largest in the area, in Palestine. But there are more. Yes?
The taking of the books happened at the same time the camps were going on?
Yes. So the taking of the looting happened in 1948 when Israel was established, and within the area. The terrorist groups, mainly Irgun was the main one, started kicking Palestinians out of their homes, be it through violence, scare tactics. However, they started uprooting Palestinians from their homes and moving them to the Palestinian side. So when you move people like that, they don't really have a chance to pack their stuff. So once you have all these empty homes, a lot of the Jews who now were occupying these areas were taking all the looting all of the goods and expensive stuff that was there, because we all like our gold and expensive stuff. So they were taking advantage and looting it all. But the books, the reason why it was labeled European-style colonialism is because the books are what makes a culture. Knowledge is what makes a culture. So when you take that culture's knowledge and integrate it into your own, it's as if that culture never existed. So it's European-style colonialism because they're very fond of moving in, taking, and burning whatever they don't want, kind of thing.
Any other questions? So there's free food and refreshments back there. Anyone enjoy what you saw? But before that said,
Okay. There's going to be an SJP